All right. Well, like Rachel said, my name is Jeff. I'm the discipleship pastor at Life Church Livonia. I've been there for 4 years. I'm also working on my graduate degree at Moody Theological Seminary, where I'm working on a master's in spiritual formation and discipleship. So I graduate this spring. Anybody else graduate this spring? Anybody? Yeah. Isn't it exciting? I'm excited to be done with school. So before I moved down here for graduate school and to work at Life Church, I was a youth pastor for 10 years up in Alaska. So this idea of hugging bears is like, it's a no-no. Like you see bears in Alaska and you play dead or you fight really hard. But yeah, so that's been fun. It's been quite the transition to come here to Michigan. Before then, I lived in Colorado. I went to school for my undergrad in Chicago at a small Christian university, and I also lived in Washington for a little while. So I've been around our great country and seen the sights. My family, I am married for almost 3 years now, coming on 4. Oh, nice. That's my wife right there. I also have another picture of my family. We just had our first kid this past fall. Her name is Annika, and she's 5 months right now, and she is the cutest thing in the whole wide world. Loves her dad, and there we are. That's like a month after she was born. She's like, everybody scared me about babies, how hard they are, and like my baby's perfect. And I'm like, thank you, Jesus. Like, I get some sleep, and she's just a fun little girl to have a part of my life. And so I'd also tell you some of my interests, but right now my interests are kind of put on standstill because of her. But in my free time, if I get any, and before she was born, I love to play disc golf. Anybody else disc golfer up in here? Yes. All right, so I love playing disc golf. That's how I get outside around here. And I love video games. Any Fortnite players by chance? Yeah? No? No. I'm kind of done with Fortnite too. What is it? Apex Legends are out now? That's kind of fun. So I occasionally game. I'm not a big gamer, but it's how I pass some of my time. And then I love going to concerts. Any music lovers up in here? Yeah, so I love going to concerts. Love metal. I don't know if anybody else likes that. Yeah. I'm going to go see As I Lay Dying.
Iron, baby.
So, yeah. And so actually, funny story. A guy that's a part of my story I'm going to tell you guys tonight, my friend Kevin, his wife works for Alaska Airlines, and so we actually, our very first show together, we flew from Alaska to Chicago to see As I Lay Dying on like standby tickets. And so we get there right before the concert starts, and we're like exhausted because most of the flights from Alaska leave at like midnight, and so we left the night before. We flew all day, all around the country trying to get to Chicago. We walk into the House of Blues, and we're exhausted. We have our backpacks on, and we got hugely blessed. It was definitely a God moment for us. This bouncer comes up to me, he's like, "Do you guys already have tickets?" And we're like, "Yeah." And we're like, about ready to show him because we're about ready to go in. He's like, "Here, these are better tickets." And we're like, "What?" And we were on the floor, which is pretty good for metal, but when you're exhausted, not so much. And he gave us like these balcony seats up in the House of Blues so we could just like chill. It was like a huge cool thing. But anyway, so I love going to concerts, and I'm excited to see them later this year. But I'm here to talk about relationships, and so before we do that, I would just love to pray with you guys. Will you guys join me in prayer? Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you for what a good and gracious God you are. That you are a God that's bigger than our circumstances, bigger than our mistakes. That your grace is bigger than anything that we could come against with our sin or our choices. And so I'm thankful for that we serve a loving and graceful God. And so as we just speak about relationships tonight, Lord, I just pray that you would just open up our hearts and ears to your truth and your wisdom, that we be taking an honest look at our own lives and our own approaches to relationships. We'd be honest about our own mistakes, our own misconceptions about relationships, and that we just touched by your wisdom and truth. Lord, I also just pray that you would just spur these students on to the questions and the things that they have on their heart that they really want to know about. So when we have question and answer time, Lord, that they wouldn't be afraid to ask, so we can just get it out in the open and have a great discussion as a group. And just bless me as I talk and share my personal story. And so, God, we just ask you to come into this time and ask this in your Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen. Amen. All right. So, as a youth pastor, I've given quite a few relationship talks. And if you guys have been a part of a church for any amount of time as a student, you guys have probably heard a lot of relationship talks. So I feel like I'm up against a little something because most of them have to do with the do's and the don'ts of relationships, right? Like, this is what you're allowed to do, this is what you're not allowed to do. And at least the talks I've given have kind of been around that. And so I want to kind of just share my personal story and kind of get a little bit more vulnerable with you guys tonight about a time in my life where I made some poor choices and I experienced some deep pain that changed the way I thought about relationships and the way I engaged in dating relationships. And so tonight I just want to be vulnerable. This is great, right? You just met me and here I am. I'm going to bare my soul to you guys, okay? And share one of the deepest things I've ever experienced in my life. Before I married my sweet wife, Becca, I was previously married up in Alaska. I dated she's a nice woman, and she was an English teacher. Her name's Amy. We dated for 2 years, and then ended up getting married, and we're married for 4.5 years. And so tonight I want to share my story about that relationship and what transpired, how it ended, so what happened, what I did about it during our divorce, and how it changed the way I approach relationships. And I know this is about a marriage, but I want you guys to kind of enter into my story. It's very just narrative here. And I want you guys to just enter into my story and think about how you enter into relationships when you were dating, and how do you approach things, and what are maybe some life lessons that God is trying to teach you through some of your mistakes and some of your successes through dating. And listen to my story and learn from me and my mistakes and where God took me in this too, okay? Because I believe that God has redeemed this in my life, and that God has used this opportunity not only to grow me, but to teach others about relationships and how to handle them. And so I just want to share with you guys tonight. So I'm going to start the day it happened, the day my wife left me. She was, like I said, she was an English teacher, a high school English teacher, and I was a youth pastor. And we woke up at different times because she had to be at school at 6 in the morning, and I'm a youth pastor. So I stayed in bed until 10 or 10:30 and went to work at 11. And our schedules were very different because, I worked at church during the afternoon and then had youth group and youth events in the night, and she was at school all day. And so that morning I was very surprised because I woke up and saw my wife still in bed. And it's, like 7 o'clock, I'm confused. School starts in a half hour, what are you doing? And she told me that she had just finished a really rough week. She did a lot of extracurricular events. She led dances and things of that nature. She was really involved in her high school. And she said she just had a really tough week and that she wanted to take a half a day just to recoup. And I was flabbergasted because our personalities were very different too. I'm pretty laid back. In fact, sometimes I procrastinate and I'm kind of lazy. And compared to her, she was like a workaholic and a perfectionist. And so I was shocked that she was taking time for herself. I was really impressed. And so I was encouraging her that the fact that she made the decision to stay home. So I went about my day. I came home. I entered through the garage, which opened up right into our house where our dining room was, and I saw a letter, and it was addressed to me. And I was like, what's this? I opened it up, and I read the letter, and inside of it, it was long. It said how she was upset with me, and she listed 3 things that she wanted changed, and she stated that she was leaving, but she gave no apparent time for how long or where she was staying or where she was going. And the 3 reasons that she said that she left me, which are very surface, and I knew there was something bigger going on, was that I needed to take care of some debt I had accrued. I had a little under $1,000 in credit card debt. We had separate credit cards, but we were trying to live debt-free. It was a goal that we both set, and I had failed to keep my end of the bargain. And so, small as it was, she was upset about that. I was also a little discontent in my job. I was having some trouble with some of the leadership in my church, and I was wondering if I was supposed to stay there. And so I was very unsettled about my job, and she didn't appreciate that, and she wanted me to either approach leadership or find a new position. So one of the demands that she asked was, 1, I would take care of my debt. 1, I would talk to leadership about my job or find another one. The next one was school. Like I said, I have a tendency to sometimes be lazy and a procrastinator, and I was currently taking one of my graduate's classes, and I had a project that I'd been putting off, and it was coming close to being due. And her being a perfectionist that she was, she's the type of student, and maybe some of you guys are, and I applaud you, so I don't think down upon this at all because you're different from me. But she's the kind of person that would have turned it in early and done everything extra, you know? And so for me to do that, she was very disappointed in me. So like I said, there was no indication about whether or not she was going to come back. And so I rushed up my stairs to our master bedroom because I'm trying to figure out clues. You instantly go to detective mode. You kind of get what I call on the crazy train emotionally, okay? When something this kind of catastrophic things have happened to you, maybe you've had something similar, probably not a divorce, but like something tragic in your life where you've gone this way. I got a crazy train. I ran upstairs. I looked in our bedroom. I noticed our closet. All her clothes are gone. I'm like, oh no. And I ran into the bathroom, and I saw that all her personal hygiene stuff was gone. And so then I'm running downstairs and I'm looking around, all the things, all the little trinkets and everything that was distinctly hers was completely gone. Even the extra set of keys to her car, which normally was hung by the door, were gone. And I knew I was in trouble. I knew that this was serious. This wasn't some stunt to get me to do something she wants me to do, but this was serious. She was really considering probably divorcing me. And so I was so angry, as you can imagine. This is just such a flood of emotions when you enter into anything so traumatic in your life. And if you've experienced loss or anything of this magnitude, it's crazy the two different kinds of emotion you get. I could be sad, but I was so angry. Like I was yelling because I was upset, but I was also crying because I was so brokenhearted. And I was so scared too. As a pastor, my job could be potentially at stake. I didn't know if I was going to be able to keep my job, my livelihood, if I would have to leave the state, if I would lose my house. I had no idea what was going to happen. I was concerned, scared, frustrated, didn't know what to do. Luckily, I feel like the Spirit of God really was moving in me because I'm naturally an introvert, an extrovert for the sake of the gospel, but I'm an introvert. That's why I like disc golf. You know, it's just you, the discs, the baskets, you know, out in the wilderness. It's really nice. And I was like, so normally as an introvert, like when I get this way, I handle things on my own, right? I go up to my room, process it in my head, think things out, cry, whatever I need to do. That's how I handle a lot of my situations that are tough. But I knew I needed people in this moment. So I called my coworker, my friend Nancy. She worked with me in youth ministry, and her family definitely loved on me, and her kids were in my youth group, and we did a lot of events at her house. So I called her up because I knew she would be home, and I'm like, can I come over to your house? And she's like, yes. I go tell her what's going on. I call a couple more of my friends because I just knew I needed people. Like I knew I needed to be around people. And then I called my boss, the senior pastor of my church, to let him know. But I ended up having to leave him a voicemail because he's at a meeting that I'm supposed to be at. So then I start freaking out about that because there's this huge meeting I'm supposed to be a part of and I'm not there. And then finally later in the night, I call my counselor that I've seen before. It had been a while, but I knew I needed support. I was a mess. I didn't know what to do. And honestly, at that moment in time, I didn't think our relationship was at this point. That was what was probably the hardest thing for me. It's like I knew our relationship was bad, but I was kind of living in this like, just kind of aloof, like positive, like, oh, it's fine, and kind of ignoring what's going on under the current. And so it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks out of nowhere when this happened. But if I'm honest, and now that I look back, hindsight 20/20, right? We were being cold to each other. We weren't talking about our issues. We weren't entering into a relationship. And our marriage was in isolation. It was in isolation because like I had my group of friends and she had her group of friends. We never did anything as a couple. Like she attended a women's ministry group at our church and I attended a men's, you know. And so, but we never did a Bible study together. We occasionally attended church together, mainly because my job, I had to do a lot of things, so we didn't sit together and really engage in worship together because I worked at church. And so here I am in this messy position. There's a lot of things you can do when you're in this messy position. There's a lot of stances you can take. You can kind of get in your place of like a self-pity pit is what I like to call it, where you just kind of play the victim and get concerned about yourself and you just beat up on yourself and kind of go on this downward spiral. I knew, being a pastor, like I know that's bad, but when you're in it, that's really easy to step in. That's where I wanted to go. And do things like self-medicate, you know? It's really easy. I like beer. Don't know if that's okay to say here, but I like beer. And so like, it's been really easy for me to just jump into my fridge and drown my sorrows in that moment. and just kind of step in that self-pity and medicate myself through alcohol or other means. Or the other side of things too, like I said, I was angry. And I wanted to seek revenge. I wanted to go in my car and drive everywhere I knew to go find her, to give her a piece of my mind, to tell her how much she hurt me, to slash her tires. Like, I was there, to be honest with you guys. I was there. I was so upset. But this is what I did about it. And this is where I think some of the lessons about relationships start to come into play. Because, like I said, a lot of our talks about relationships, they talk about do's and don'ts, and they don't talk about some of the heart of the issues. And my heart, this was happening to me. My heart wasn't in the best place. I wasn't handling my marriage the best way I possibly could. So the first thing I did is I got into community. Like I said, I started calling my friends. And the reason I did this is because the devil loves to put us in isolation. If you don't know that, the devil loves to put us in isolation. And just think about it as like a predator animal trying to get their prey. The best way that happens, you can watch all the funny cat videos you want, or you can watch a lion kill something, right? And they isolate it, they sneak up on it, and boom, they take it out. And the devil does that with us too. And he did that with my marriage. And when you're in a dating relationship, it's real easy to get in the same place. If you're dating somebody, all of a sudden you got these feelings for this new girl, and finally she said yes to going on a date with you, and you're dating and you're hanging out in your room, and like all you want to do is hang out with them, right? Because you got all this flood of emotions, watch movies, Netflix, and chill, you know, whatever. And that happens, right? And you sooner or later you're pulling out of your friends groups, and it's just you two hanging out. It's just you two hanging out, and you are disconnected from your friends, you're disconnected from your community. The devil's got you in isolation. It's real easy to make poor choices in isolation. And so I just want to read to you John 10:10. The first part of that verse says this: the thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. That's the devil's purpose. That's what he wants to do to you. And he's cunning. That's the sneaky thing, is he's cunning. I would have never imagined, like I said, I was very ignorant of what was going on in my marriage, but it was a slow thing. I was slowly being pulled into isolation, me and my wife. We were slowly making poor choices on how to engage each other. And so just think about that in your guys' dating relationships. When you enter into a dating relationship, don't fall into temptation of becoming isolated with that person and stepping out of your community. So, because God's purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. That's the next part of that verse. And then I want to also read you guys a verse out of Hebrews 10:25. It says, let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. And so this verse in itself is just talking about motivating each other and encouraging each other, and that's what community is about. And community can keep you from that isolation that can lead to poor choices or just spiritual death. And so what I did was try to stay out of isolation. I let my friends know what was going on. I called my friends in the area. I sought them out, and they sought me out. Oftentimes when we're in a place where we're experiencing some kind of trauma or we're having trouble, and this could be in your dating relationship or even just relationships with your friends or just in your personal life, we have a tendency to wait for people to come help us. And we wait on this island waiting to be rescued when all we have to do is call out. And so that's one of the things I knew I needed to do is I couldn't live and stay in this place of isolation, and I couldn't wait for people to come help me. I needed to seek help. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're struggling in your dating relationships, if you're struggling with anything personally, seek out help, okay? Because as much as we want the attention and people to come to us, it just doesn't work that way oftentimes. And a lot of times people just don't know what's going on. And so you got to be honest. I met with my pastor regularly to stay in community, and he encouraged me to be in God's Word and to keep me accountable, and he prayed for me. And I started going to counseling, like I said. Dr. Larry, he's a Christian counselor. I started seeing him again. I called him my Yoda. I never told him this. He might have been offended, but he's this short little old man. I imagine what Yoda would look like as a human. And he would never talk a whole lot, but when he talked, words of wisdom came out just like Yoda. And so one of the things he helped me do that kind of brings me to help me see is that, which is my next point, which is healthy relationships start with you. Healthy relationships start with you. If you're wondering why you have a lot of dysfunctional relationships with people, it's not the other person. Sorry. Common denominator, it's you. And that's not a diss on you. That's not like trying to, put you in a weird place. But like, I had to own that. I had to own that this relationship was not just my ex-wife's choices. The reason why this was ending was not just her. I had a part to play in it. And so going to counseling with Dr. Larry helped me a lot. He taught me that healthy relationships start with you. I had to come to grips that I can't change my wife. Even if she would choose to come back in and work on our marriage, which she didn't, even if she did that, I can't change her. I don't control her. She's her own person. She makes her own choices. I can influence her. I can be a good example, but I can only control me. And that sounds weird when you're in a relationship, but that's the truth. Like oftentimes we get into relationships and we try to make that person our idealized person or ourselves, and we try to like say, oh, you're not interested in that? Well, you really should be. Or you don't like something they do, and you're like, that's stupid. Like, I still do that to my wife sometimes. She's like, stop. I'm like, okay. But you can't change other people. And so I had to come to realize that I can only change me. And so I just want to read you a verse out of Matthew, because there's just so many good verses that just God speaks to these things. And one of it's out of Matthew 7, 3 through 5. And I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with this. Is why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own? You hypocrite, first take out the plank of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And so just taking my marriage relationship, and that is like, she had her issues. I could call them out. She could call mine out. But my responsibility is mine. And hopefully through me working on what I need to do, then hopefully that will inspire her to work on the things she needs to work on. And so he encouraged me to take the high road in that. And part of that was not stepping into anger. Anybody else have a temper? Anybody want to admit they have a temper? I'm a pretty mild, chill dude, but like certain things, I'm like, what? I turn into a Hulk, man. That's at least what my wife tells me. She's like, how did you just get like angry out of the blue? I'm like, I'm sorry, I tried, I'm learning. And this is one verse that really spoke to me during this time. I read through Romans 12. If you ever are looking for something to read through over and over and over again, I highly encourage reading chapter 12 of Romans. I think it's one of the most applicable chapters in the Bible to how to live life in a way that is honoring to God. Because it's talking about love, it's talking about judgment, it's talking about how to live at peace with everyone. In fact, that's what this verse says. It says in Romans 12, 17 through 19, do not repay evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. Verse 18 there became a life verse, for lack of better terms, during that time for me. Live at peace, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And so, as far as it depends on you, and that was that whole idea of like, I needed to control what I can control. I can't control my wife and her decisions at this time, but I can work on me. And see, there's benefits to that that my counselor would talk to me about. And if you're working on you, even if my relationship ends, I come out better because I'm working on myself. If I'm so focused on working on her, then it just becomes this, and I'm going to be the same person I was when the relationship ended. Yeah. And so spending that time working on myself was good. I recently had a friend who, unfortunately, he went through a divorce too. We were childhood friends. We grew up down the street from each other, and I was so thankful because he reached out to me during all this, but also just like bummed out because here I have just gone through this, and I'm trying to coach him as best I can as a friend, But he was making some choices that he's like, hasn't, he just started dating. And they got divorced and he just started dating right away and just made some poor choices. And all of a sudden he's like, what am I doing? And I was just so thankful. I've been praying for him so hard. And he called me. He's like, Jeff, I've been making some dumb choices. I'm like, yup. He's like, why didn't you say anything? I'm like, dude, I tried to say stuff to you, man. Like I said, but like you can only do you, man. Like, so, and all of a sudden he's like, all right. And it just dawned on him. Sometimes you have to learn through the school of hard knocks, right? Like sometimes you have to fall flat on your face before you learn the lessons that God is trying to teach you. I am a testament to that in a lot of different areas in my life. And so I was happy that he got back on the high road there and started seeking counseling and help and trying to better himself too. And so that's one thing. I also had to own my part in the relationship. See, God calls me as a husband and as a man to certain standards. And so I'm not going to read all of it. Ephesians 5, it's also highly argued about. But Ephesians 5, it talks about what it looks like for a man to love his wife. And it is that you're supposed to love your wife like Christ loved the church. Think about that for a minute. You're supposed to love your wife as Christ loved the church. Christ died for the church. Like, dang, that's deep. And in fact, that's hard. And so as my counselor was helping me with some of this, to think that I need to learn how to sacrificially love. And a lot of us think highly of ourselves and we think, oh yeah, I do that. But most of us, if we're really honest, we live very much out of a transactional type of way when it comes to relationships. I do something good for you, I expect you to do something good for me. And then when you don't, you get bitter and resentful about it. And so I have begun to learn that, I need to be a man who was willing to put everything on the line for my wife. And I know in dating that's a little weird. Like you're like, okay, don't go there as dating. But you can begin to start looking at how to build your capacity for sacrificial love just by loving your friends and your family and the people around you. Just not expecting things in return. Just doing things that are extravagant beyond belief because it's the right thing to do and nothing else. Don't expect any thank you. Don't expect anything in return. It's awkward sometimes because in our culture it's better to tear each other down. It's more normal to tear each other down and talk sarcastically to each other and just like beat each other up than it is to like extravagantly love on each other. Especially for dudes. I don't know about females, but like I'm a guy and like it's weird. Like some guy blesses me with something. I was like, dude, I can take care of myself. Like those are kind of thoughts that come to my mind, right? Instead of just being thanks, that's awesome. And so I began to learn that, and I just want to encourage you guys too, is that right now in your life, you're in college, you guys got a lot, marriage is probably not on your mind, maybe it is a little bit, but you're definitely probably thinking about school and stuff like that, but this is an opportunity, this is a perfect time for you guys to start practicing things like this, because this is going to walk through with you into the relationships that you go into. Plus, when I was in college, we had a similar type group, and I heard this preacher preach, and he said this, and it made an impact on me, and I'm not going to do it perfectly because it's been a long time since I've been in college. But he said this, he's like, you attract the kind of person you are. I was like, damn, that's harsh. If you're superficial, you're going to attract superficial people. If you're all about aesthetics and that's it, that's the kind of person you're going to attract. If you're dysfunctional, you're going to attract the other dysfunctional. And obviously there's exceptions to this, okay? It's not cut and fast rule. But if you want to date a man or a woman of God who loves you well and treats you right and has the priorities of the kingdom of God on their heart, then you need to be that woman of God that does those things. If you're not seeking after the kingdom of God and you're not loving him in a way that is transforming your life, don't expect to marry a person that's doing the same. That was a hard dose of reality that I had to take when I recognized who my wife was at that time. I was like, man, I was kind of living a real superficial life at that point in time. I just wanted to check the boxes. I wanted a career, check. I wanted a house, check. I wanted a wife, check. I wanted a kid, check. And opportunity presented itself, but I don't think I discerned or asked God about those things. My career, yes, when I got up there, I definitely discerned that because it was Alaska. So you don't just go to Alaska. God called me there. But the rest, like, I was just, oh, there's this beautiful girl that likes me. Cool. All right. Like, that's all I did. I didn't do much discerning there. And I wish I had. And I think there was times in my life during that time when we were engaged that God was trying to tip me off. He was trying to show me that that she wasn't the one he had for me. So I'll get into that a little later. But the other thing is that God had to be my king and my priority. Your significant other can't. Oftentimes we get into relationships, we seek value, we seek to be completed, we seek to find happiness through somebody else. We're like, this person's going to make me happy. If I could just date a super hot chick, then I'd be so happy, because then I'd be fulfilled as a man, because obviously I got her, so I'm definitely a man then, right? Because she's hot, right? No? Okay. Maybe. But we do that kind of stuff. We said, man, we aspire to try to date people that are our idealized self oftentimes. And when we do stuff like that, when we prioritize somebody else, we end up putting that person in the throne of our heart, which is where God is supposed to be. They become an idol. And that's hard. When you start thinking about idol worship, and when I think about it, I think about like Old Testament. Like I said, I'm in seminary, so I think about like even like little idols that we have that people worship. Even today, there's people that worship like little, figurines, and they represent their God or whatever. And when you think about worshiping a person, we get, we don't do that, but we do because we prioritize them. We expect them to give stuff to us. If I put you here, you're going to make me happy. You're going to fulfill my wishes. How self-centered is that? First of all, that's super self-centered. It's all about you. Relationships are not. Relationships are so about realizing, it's hard, man. Just like the Christian life. Christian life is not easy. If you don't know that, I'm sorry, I just broke your bubble. But Christian life is not easy, right? And neither is a healthy Christian relationship. It's not easy. The devil doesn't want that. And it's not easy because it's about sacrificial love. It's about giving more than you're getting. Oftentimes you'll hear relationships will say, 50-50. It's 100-100. You give all, and even if your spouse is only giving 80 at the moment, you still give 100. We just got a kid, and man, my selflessness has had to go out the window for sure. So, and I just want to say this too about idols is this is why in 1 Corinthians 7, when it talks about being single, Paul's talking about being single and how it's better to be single because your priorities can be for the kingdom of God. And when you are in a relationship, all of a sudden your values are torn. And I feel this as a pastor and who has a wife and a kid. Oftentimes I have to make really tough choices about what I feel. And my work is the kingdom of God, so that messes things up too. So there's all these crazy boundaries I'm trying to have in my life. And but here somebody's in need, and it's my job as a pastor to go there. Yet my family hasn't seen me in a while. What do I do? I'm torn. Whereas when you're single, easy choice. People in need. Boom, I can go there. And so take advantage of this time. Serve God. It's going to benefit you even when you do get married or start dating somebody. It's benefit. So all this said, this also changed the way I approach relationship. Unfortunately, as you guys kind of foreseen, my divorce, I ended in divorce. We tried to work it out. I tried to work it out. My wife was not about it. For 4 months, we stayed separated, and we had to end it. And her being a teacher and me volunteering at the school and being a youth pastor, we were in a small town in Alaska. It was very public, and it was really hard to public people. And so it put me in a weird position because I had to definitely take the high road, and she didn't, which was hard because it's really easy to take the high road and you don't know what's going on with that person. I was also taking the high road, but when somebody else starts talking, trash about you and starts, ruining your reputation and stuff like that, and she has influence over the same people I have influence over. Like, I'm called to serve the high school students of this town, and she's also doing it, and she has my students, and I have her students, and so they're hearing things. It was crazy. I'm just trying to be like, I'm sorry to hear that. I don't think that's true. You know, like, I just had to constantly, like, not get back, or like, oh yeah, you know what? She was, you know, like, I could have laid in, but I couldn't do that, right? And she made some choices. Like, I found out later on that she was dating somebody else while we were married, and lots of things. And so it was really hard to hear that and not be able to express that back, you know, when you hear somebody else talking trash. And so I changed how I live, how I approach relationships. So one, I took a year off, because obviously after something devastating like that, you shouldn't date right away, okay? Heads up, if you walk away with anything, there it is, okay? Take a year off for sure, if not longer. And I was like, I'm going to give myself a year and work on myself. I'm going to stay going to counseling, working on my issues, and I just pressed more and more into that. I learned more about personality tests so I could figure out who I was. Because a lot of us are we can be very perceptive of other people, but we're not very aware of us, right? Like, and it's tough for other people to tell us the truth about us because it's not very polite oftentimes. And so we walk around in this life very unaware of what we do and how we interact with people and some of our dysfunctions. And so it's important, and I found it very important, that I need to start working on myself in a way that I was very aware of who I was. One that helped me accept some of my faults and some of my dysfunction, but it also helped me push into that and start to correct some of those things. And so before I even got into relationships, that's what I wanted to do. And you guys are in a position right now where you can begin on that. And I know, like, more work when you're going to school sounds like torture, but like, I find this work a lot nicer because it's like, oh, there's certain personality profiles you can like take and learn about and learn. What I do is called the Enneagram. I don't know if you guys have heard about it, but I learned a lot about myself through that, and I realized, wow, it's like ingrained in my personality to be slothful and lazy, and I'm like, but I can't stay there. It's also ingrained in my personality to be a person of diplomacy and love, like, and that's who I am when I'm functioning at what God has called me to be. And so to not live in isolation and to work on myself was definitely something I needed to do. I stayed plugged into community, and I gave my community input on who I was dating, okay? This might sound like crazy, but you gotta trust your community and you gotta be in the right community. With my ex-wife, my sister, who I'm really close to, and my family tried to tell me, but they were scared because they saw how much I was in love with her, right? And my feelings I have for her, and they didn't want to say, hey, Jeff, you know, like, that's what my sister was all about. Like, she tried the hardest out of everybody, out of all my friends and all my family. It was like, you shouldn't, no, this is not the right person for you. And I wish I would have listened. I wish she would have been more bold, and I wish I would have been more receptive and more willing. And so give permission to your community to have input about who you're dating. That's tough, you know, because you're putting it out there, right? And so after I got divorced, I started dating, and I would call my sister. Hey, this is who I'm dating. What do you think? You know, and she'd Facebook stalk them or whatever, you know, Google them and do background checks and all that kind of stuff. And when I started dating my wife, Becca, we'd known each other up in Alaska for a little while. We started dating right before I left. And before I came here, I went and stayed a couple months with my parents in Colorado before I moved here. And I said, you should fly down and meet my parents. And she was like, so it was a little soon, like we just started dating. Like we knew each other, but we just started dating, and we were gonna date long distance, which is a whole other ballgame. And if you guys have questions about that tonight, I'd love to answer those. And so I told her, yeah, you need to come down and meet my parents. And I told her straight up, I'm like, you're gonna be interrogated by my family while you're here, just to let you know. Because my parents and me, like everybody's got PTSD after this divorce, so they definitely want to like know you and get to know you and approve you. And I said, but be yourself, you know? And yeah, she was like, yeah, right. So she came down, and that's what happened. Like, they interrogated her. I mean, nicely. I mean, my family's pretty cool. But there was times where, like, we'd hang out later in the evening, and Becca was like, she's like, man, your sister really kind of run me through the ringer. And I was like, well, do you blame her? And she's like, no. I said, well, my sister likes her. And so I got a stamp of approval for my friends, my close friends. I got a stamp of approval for my family. I had already approved of her, and so it's good. So that's that. Like, so invite your community. It's important to stay in community and invite them to give input about who you're dating and whether or not they're a right fit for you, because they might see things you're not willing to see because you got those blinders on. The other thing is my community became my anchor emotionally and spiritually. Oftentimes, like I said earlier in the evening, like, we get to dating and we're isolated in our dating relationships. We're spending all our free time with the girl or the guy that we're dating, and we pull ourselves out of community. And we begin to rely on that person emotionally and spiritually. That is just not okay. And the reason is one, like, it's just tough. Like, especially when you break up, things happen, right? Like, you break up, and if you're like, this is your only person, and they're the only person that says it, then it's a tough place to be in when all of a sudden you're alone. And oftentimes when you pull yourself out of your community, then your friends are all ticked off too, because they're like, oh, you start dating a guy and then you're gone. I remember in high school I started dating a girl, and all my guy friends were like so ticked off. And I was like trying to be good. I was like, okay, Friday night's my date night with Jessica, and then Saturday night, boys' night out. Saturday night's for the boys. And they didn't. That was good. It was good balance. But they didn't like it because I wasn't hanging out with them 24/7. So one night, me and my girlfriend at the time were walking out of my house, and they're hanging out in a bush, and they have a blow gun with paintballs. And all of a sudden, like, I'm kissing her goodnight by her car, and she's about ready to leave home, and all of a sudden, here's whoo, bam, right on our garage door, and see this paintball fly. I'm like, what the junk is going on? and I'm like, I think you should get in the car. I think I know what's going on. A couple more come flying by. Me and my boys had some words after that. But stay in community and support your brothers and sisters who are dating people, and encourage them to stay in community with you. Don't get bitter or jealous that they're dating and you're not. Be nice to them and encourage them to be their support. And then seek help, like I already said tonight too. I started to seek help when I needed it. When I first started dating after my divorce, I started dating this girl long distance that I met, and because I was in Alaska. There's not very many women in Alaska, by the way. And so, all right. They always say in Alaska the odds are good, but the odds aren't good. Yeah, for guys at least. Just seek help when you need it. Don't expect people to come to you, and that's how I've always functioned too. Since this is that I just need to look for my help. And the other thing that I approached differently was just making sure I worked on myself, making sure that as I'm dating somebody, I'm truly getting to know them. That I'm not trying to falsely view them, that I'm asking the hard questions, that I'm not navigating that. It's really easy to do, especially early on, but when me and Becca started dating, she was engaged and then broke it off like a month before her wedding. And so we have kind of like somewhat similar stories. But she had to break that off, and so that was pretty traumatic for her too. And so we just entered this place, which is a little easier to do when you're older, where it was just like, we didn't give a crap. We knew what we wanted, we knew what we didn't want, and we weren't gonna play games. And that's a great way to date, honestly. You play games and you try to be something you're not. I remember when I was in college, this is not advice, this is what you shouldn't do. This is prior to like Google being awesome. I bought a book called Dating for Dummies. And it is all about like pretending to be something you're not. It's like, this is how to impress a woman. This is what you should do. This is what you don't do. And I was just trying to figure out how to get girls to like me. So, but it was a bad choice, because I was putting out something I wasn't. And then when we started getting into our relationship, they would get disappointed. I would get disappointed because I wasn't being me. I wasn't being who God had created me. I was trying to be who I thought they wanted. And so I worked on myself. I tried to get to know who they were. I definitely did try to change people I dated. I worked on a relationship with God and continuing to learn what it meant to love sacrificially. I decided to start loving all my friends as much as possible, no matter, and not expecting anything in return. And that has paid dividends because when I married Becca, it's just, marriage relationship is a lot of sacrifice. You have to love each other well, and there's times where you just have to sacrifice for the sake of your relationship, and especially when you have kids. And so practicing this now is important because it'll help you later on. I mean, just the other night, because I love my wife, and I took my daughter all night, which means I don't get much sleep, and she gets to sleep through the night, So, I go to work on 2 hours of sleep, and she got a whole full night of sleep, So my daughter can be taken care of, and my wife too. And so you just do things like that, So practice that in ways that are simple right now so that you can grow in that in your relationship. And then just remember that God sits at the center of your life, not your significant other. Because when another person sits at the center of your life, you end up pushing God to the side. You start making compromises on your relationship that shouldn't be. And I know this can be a sticky subject, and there's different opinions on that, so please know this is my opinion on that, okay? And I'm not saying this is all Christians, but this is my opinion. It's really hard to date a non-Christian if you really are a truly committed person, a really truly committed Christian. And this is why. If God is who you say he is, if Jesus Christ is who you believe he is, then he is the Lord of your life and he is your purpose. And if that is who you love the most and that is the priority that you have the most, then somebody who does not have that and does not share that with you will never truly know you. And when you're praying about a decision and it's tough and you feel like God's coming, saying this to you, and that person doesn't want to enter prayer with you and doesn't understand how to hear the Lord, then they can't identify with you. It is funky. And I experienced that in my previous marriage. My wife was what I would call a pseudo-Christian. She didn't really have a relationship with God, in my opinion. Yet at the same time, I was struggling in my relationship too. So I just got to be real. I can't just put all the thing on her. But it was tough because I think God was making there was a point where I thought God might be calling me back to Colorado for a position, and she said nope. I was like, oh, okay, cool. But she didn't pray about it. We didn't talk about it. It was just she said no, and I kind of put my tail between my legs and said, all right. And so it's important that you think seriously about who you date, and that if you're a Christian and God is something serious in your life, then I believe personally that you should only be dating Christians. And that's tough. I know that's hard, especially when there's that fun person. I mean, I remember in high school there was a girl I was sitting next to in my German class, and I was a Christian. I've been a Christian since junior high. And there was this awesome girl. She was super cute, super fun. I was kind of like a skater at that point in time, and so was she, and we were just sitting next to each other in German, and I'm like, dude, I think I could date her. So she gives me her number right before spring break, because this is before, social media and texting, so I have to call her on the landline. And so we're talking all spring break, and then we meet. We're like, hey, let's go to the Civic Center and meet, because that would be awesome, and hang out. And so we end up meeting at the Civic Center, and next thing you know, she's talking to me how she's a witch, and how she's learning how to, what's good? Similar stories, maybe?
No, I might have been flirting with a witch, too.
Wait, we got a bond. All right.
I got my skateboard and my trunk.
That's awesome. Stealing my stories. So anyway, I didn't date her because I knew we wouldn't jive. So I kind of stopped that relationship real quick. But it's hard sometimes when you meet somebody that's super interesting and religion doesn't get brought up right away. It's tough. And so I don't want to make light of that, and I know it's a difficult thing. And so, but that's just my opinion. I mean, if God is truly the Lord of your life and is truly the most important thing in your life, then you want to share the most important thing in your life with somebody else. Really, you do. And I know right now with my relationship with Becca, that's true. we're in a place where, we pray together and we seek the Lord together and we discern what he's saying together. And that is a beautiful thing. There's nothing more intimate than that, And so it's awesome. And so I just encourage you to date Christians if you are a Christian. So all this kind of helped me get back into the dating scene. This is what I learned through my experience. And I didn't want to settle for just having somebody, and that's tough. It's tough to do. I haven't been specifically in your shoes, but I've been in college and it's tough in college today, man. It's so tough, and so I'm not trying to make light of any of these things, but I think these things are more at the heart of where you need to be at and more of the things you need to work on if you really want to have healthy relationships. And other things will come. Things like boundaries will come because when one of my pet peeves is, first of all, like that cat, right? One of my pet peeves is first of all, there's no such thing as biblical dating because dating didn't happen in the Bible, right? We know that. So then we have to, as smart people, we have to read the Bible, pull out the values that God is teaching us, and realize how those apply to our lives. And one of the most important things that he teaches us is that our relationship with our spouse is as intimate as the Trinity. Think about it for a minute. I know the Trinity is hard to fathom, but God is the Son is the God, and the Holy Spirit, and they all function together in this beautiful relationship. And just look at it, Jesus and God, and just how intimate their relationship was in the Gospels. If our spouses and our relationship is supposed to be that holy and that sacred, then we need to be careful in how we date and how we approach these things. And we need to work on ourselves so that we, when we do find somebody, and we're prepared, and we hope that they're doing the same thing. And so these things help place those things, because I think sometimes we try to talk about boundaries right out here, and if we're not doing the heart work, it's backwards, right? Boundaries are there for a purpose, and I think sometimes when we think about boundaries, we think of a jail cell, and they just confine us, and we're, in prison. But when I think about boundaries, I'd rather think about a river. A river has banks. It keeps that river flowing and beautiful, and life springs up from it. But if it gets outside of that, it gets disastrous, right? You got a flood when the river overflows. And so boundaries are there to keep our lives flowing smoothly. And so, but if our heart isn't in it, then oftentimes when we start asking boundary questions, we're asking for the wrong reasons. And so I don't want that to squelch any questions that you guys have about boundaries. But I just want you guys to know that's why it's important to work on your heart. Work on your relationship with God. Work on the way that you love others. Work on your community. Your community is going to teach you how to love. Your community is going to teach you how to grow. I love it that you guys are doing small groups and prayers. There's I wish I had all that. I went to Christian college and I didn't have all that. I was that would have been sweet. So get plugged in a way that it helps you grow and it helps you know yourself better. So yeah, that's all I got to say on relationships. Oh, I got one more thing. I have one more thing that I think is at the key. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time, and so I just have to say it. It's from Timothy Keller, from one of his books called The Meaning of Marriage. It says this: "To be loved and not known is comforting, but superficial. To be loved but not known is comforting, but superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. But to be fully known and truly loved is, a lot like being loved by God. And it is what we need more than anything. It liberates us from pretense. It humbles us out of our self-righteousness and fortifies us for any difficulty life can throw at us." And so, walk away with that. Because if you are focused on how much your God loves you and you can fully rest, and I know it's hard to explain, my wife always you got to get better practical points. And I'm I don't say that. But if you could fully rest in the knowledge that you are fully known by God and truly loved, that is liberating. And if you can understand that, you can begin to love the way God has called you to love. Not only a significant other, but each other. And that kind of love is the kind of love that changes the world and has changed the world. So work on that. And you'll be world changers. Work on that and you'll have healthy relationships. Let's pray and then we can talk about some questions you guys might have. So, dear Heavenly Father, I thank you that you are a God that loves us and knows us. That you see us and you still choose to love us. And that is amazing, amazing things. Because many of us, if people really knew us and our full intent, we would think that we wouldn't be loved. And the fact that you do know us and love us is just amazing. So God, I just pray over these students, pray over everybody here, Lord, that you would just liberate us from the things that are binding us, some of the false notions that we have about relationships and even ourselves, that you would help us press into what you have in store for us, and you will help us grow in our relationship with you and be liberated to love people the way you've called us to love and have significant relationships with each other. And ultimately, if you call us to a marriage that honors and glorifies you. So God, we just thank you for this time, and we thank you for this place, and we just ask that you bless the rest of our conversation. In Jesus' name, amen.